I came outside to find my neighbor, Karen, calmly plugging her hairdryer into my outdoor outlet. A pink cord stretched across my lawn like a declaration of war. She didn't ask. She didn't even see me. The audacity wasn't just impressive, it was a masterclass in entitlement. She had surveyed my property, planned her route, and executed her mission with the cold precision of a general invading neutral territory. And in that moment, I knew this was more than just stolen electricity. This was a power play, and I was about to learn just how far she would go to win. You don't just decide to plug into someone else's house. You have to locate the socket, plan the cord, and march across a property line with a full-throated conviction that the world owes you 1,800 watts of high-velocity airflow. When she finally turned, she gave me that look, the one practiced and perfected by people who have never been told no in their entire lives. Her sunglasses were the kind that covered half her face, and her hair was twisted in a towel like a crown of damp arrogance. "Oh, hey," she said casually, shouting over the dryer's whine. "You don't mind, right? Power's out on my side of the block." "Karen," I replied, my voice dangerously even. "That's because you tripped your own breaker last week running a tanning bed and two space heaters from one outlet." She tilted her head as if I had just started speaking in ancient Aramaic. "So it's temporary. I'm just doing my roots before the HOA brunch." Now, for context, Karen wasn't just a neighbor. She was the HOA's social chair, treasurer, and unofficial tyrant. If power could be measured in volts, she ran the neighborhood on 10,000 of them. She issued fines for aesthetically aggressive mailboxes, scheduled mandatory lawn inspections, and once demanded that a veteran remove his American flag because it clashed with the color harmony of the cul-de-sac. And now, she was siphoning my electricity, my literal energy, to style her hair for another morning of ruling the neighborhood with an iron fist and a perfectly coiffed hairdo. I crouched beside the socket, keeping my tone as polite as a coiled wire. "Karen, you can't just plug into my house. That's theft." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "It's just a few minutes. You probably won't even notice it on your bill." That was the moment I realized she wasn't doing this because she needed to. She was doing it because she could. She was doing it because she believed boundaries were merely suggestions and my patience was an infinite, renewable resource she was entitled to tap into. I let her have her 5 minutes. But as she strutted away, a cold certainty settled in my gut. This wasn't a one-time request. It was a test. And I had just failed. So I started planning. Not for revenge, but for the war I knew was coming. I snapped a picture with my phone, cord and all, time-stamped neatly at 10:14 a.m. Then I quietly flipped open my breaker panel and labeled the exterior outlet with a Sharpie. Karen waved, her hair now blasting backward in a glorious golden halo. "Thanks, neighbor," she shouted. "You're such a team player." That night, I checked the security camera footage. She'd come back twice. Once at 3 p.m., once around sunset. Each time, the same routine. Plug, dry, strut away like she'd earned it. By Monday, my outdoor outlet had become her personal salon station. She'd even left a folding mirror propped against the fence. The arrogance wasn't just routine now. It was infrastructure. So, I called the HOA office, not to complain, but to gather intelligence. "Hey," I asked the secretary, "do we have any policies on power use between properties?" "Not specifically," she said, "but Mrs. Dillard, Karen, she actually just submitted a proposal to restrict all exterior outlets. Says they're potential safety hazards."
Of course she did. The hypocrisy was so thick you could taste it in the air. She was cutting off everyone else's outlets while secretly draining mine. Can you believe the nerve? I thanked her and hung up. If this was a chess game, Karen had just moved her queen across my backyard. It was time to set a trap. The next morning, I spotted her again. I was sipping coffee by the kitchen window when the pink cord slithered across the grass. She didn't even knock. I waited until she disappeared around the fence, then quietly stepped into the garage. I'm an engineer by trade. Low voltage systems, solar arrays, the kind of work that teaches you to respect electricity. I also know how to rewire a 120V outlet to a dual-phase 240 Vi circuit with a flick of a breaker and a wink of copper. I wasn't going to hurt her. That'd be insane. But I wanted her hairdryer to speak the language of consequence. I flipped the switch. I waited. A few seconds later came the most satisfying sound I've ever heard. It wasn't dangerous. Just a sharp bzzzt. Then silence. Through the window, I saw Karen leap backward, clutching her dryer like a wounded bird. She stared at it in disbelief, shaking it as if that might undo the burn marks now scarring the handle. Then she stomped toward my fence, furious. "You broke my hairdryer!" she yelled. "You plugged into my house," I said, stepping outside, coffee still in hand. "It's your outlet. You have to maintain it." "That's not how electricity works." Her face turned a shade of crimson I hadn't seen outside of a wiring diagram. "I'll be reporting this to the HOA. This is vandalism of communal property." "Communal?" I asked, amused. "Pretty sure my mortgage says otherwise." She huffed, snatched up the ruined dryer, and stormed off, leaving the cord behind like a pink banner of defeat. I thought that would be the end of it. I had grossly underestimated her. That afternoon, a notice appeared on my door. A choice citation. Unauthorized modification of exterior power systems. Signed, of course, by Karen herself. She claimed I'd violated the community's electrical harmony clause. I didn't even know we had one. She wanted a war, and she'd just given me permission to escalate. So I began gathering my evidence. Every photo, every timestamp, every angle of her plugging in. I even checked my smart meter logs. Sure enough, brief, sharp spikes around her usage times. The data told a perfect, undeniable story. I printed everything, compiling it neatly into a folder I labeled The Voltage Chronicles. That Friday, I attended the HOA's open meeting. Karen sat at the head of the table in a floral blouse, looking smug and sanctified. "Next order of business," she said, tapping her clipboard. "Property violations on Oakage Court." She looked right at me. "Mr. Daniels, it seems you've been tampering with regulated electrical infrastructure." I allowed myself a small, cold smile. Without a word, I slid the thick folder across the polished table. "Funny you should say that," I said, my voice calm. "Because it seems you've been the one tampering with my property." The room fell silent. She opened the folder, her smug expression dissolving as she saw the photos, the footage stills, the meter logs, everything. For a brief, glorious moment, the queen lost her crown. I was only," she stammered. "Drying your roots," I offered helpfully. On my dime, a few board members snickered. One coughed to hide a laugh. She slammed the folder shut. "This isn't over," she hissed. She was right. It wasn't. Because the next day, I found something new on my lawn. An orange extension cord, thicker, longer, and this time, buried halfway under my garden bed. And that's when I realized she wasn't just stealing power anymore. She was digging in. By sunrise the next morning, I knew I wasn't dealing with a casual nuisance anymore. Karen's extension cord wasn't just lying across my lawn this time. It was half buried under a layer of freshly disturbed soil, carefully disguised with mulch and leaves. That meant she'd come over in the middle of the night with a shovel, dug a shallow trench through my property, and threaded a cord to reach my outlet again. Who does that? I mean seriously. Who commits electrical espionage at 2 a.m. over a hairdryer?
I crouched near the flower bed, staring at the small orange cable peeking out from the dirt like a guilty worm. For a moment, I honestly had to laugh. The effort was staggering. She'd even routed it around my motion lights so she wouldn't trigger the sensors. The woman had planned this like a military operation. I unplugged the cord and followed its path along the hedge, across the lawn, and into the narrow gap between our fences. It led right into her backyard, where it disappeared through a doggy door. I didn't have to guess what it powered anymore. I could already hear it, the faint hum of multiple appliances running off my power. Hair dryer, curling iron, maybe even a small fridge for her brunch mimosas. I took a few photos, coiled the exposed part of the cable, and went inside. By noon, I'd had 2 cups of coffee, a plan, and a renewed appreciation for the HOA's spectacular hypocrisy. Because while Karen was busy weaponizing bylaws against me, she was violating about 6 of them herself. Unauthorized landscaping, exterior modifications, and my personal favorite, property intrusion. But I didn't call the cops. Not yet. I wanted to see just how far she'd go when someone refused to play her game. Around 3 p.m., I saw her standing on her driveway talking to another neighbor, Mrs. Collins, one of the HOA board members. Karen gestured dramatically toward my house, like she was describing a crime scene. Collins looked uncertain, then disinterested, and finally walked away. Karen folded her arms, spotted me watching from my porch, and smiled, a perfect, smug little curve that said, "I win." That night, I decided to bait her. I set up a decoy outlet box, a fake exterior socket wired internally to a portable surge monitor instead of the house grid. If she plugged in again, the system would log the exact moment and voltage draw. Then I'd have irrefutable proof she was back at it. Sure enough, at 11:42 p.m., the monitor beeped. She'd fallen for it. My phone alert buzzed, recording the event. I peeped through the blinds and saw the silhouette of Karen crouched beside the outlet, her flashlight trembling in the dark. She wasn't just using it anymore, she was checking it as if she suspected I'd done something. When she finally left, I stepped outside and retrieved the evidence. A half-burnt plug and a melted extension cord tip. She'd shorted her own line again. The next morning, she appeared on my doorstep with a clipboard and a look of official fury. "You tampered with the communal electrical supply," she announced. I blinked. Communal? Yes. The HI has determined that outdoor outlets fall under neighborhood accessibility during power shortages. Your noncompliance is grounds for a fine. Show me where it says that. She flipped through her clipboard, pages fluttering in the breeze. I knew she didn't have it. She was making it up, hoping raw intimidation would carry her through. When she found nothing, she shifted tactics. Well, even if it's not written, it's implied. As a member of this community, you're expected to assist neighbors in good faith. Karen, I said, my patience thinning to a single, frayed wire. You didn't ask for help. You tunneled through my garden like an electrical mole. She narrowed her eyes. What's your tone, Daniel? The HOA takes harassment seriously. Great, I said. Then maybe they'll take theft seriously, too. Her jaw tightened. She turned on her heel and marched off. For a moment, I thought she might finally retreat. Instead, she posted something new on the HOA bulletin board that afternoon. Reminder, tampering with HOA equipment or interfering with community power access may result in penalties. She was rewriting the rules on paper after the fact to justify her own actions. That was the moment I decided to go fully technical. Over the weekend, I upgraded my outdoor power system, not illegally, just smartly. I installed a small subpanel for my workshop, complete with voltage step-ups and isolated circuits. My home battery backup had dual outputs, 120V for the house and 240V for tools and heavy gear. One switch, 2 modes. By Monday, the setup was ready. Around 9 a.m., I spotted her husband, Greg, in their driveway. He gave me the usual awkward nod. Greg was the silent sufferer type, always caught between Karen's schemes and the rest of humanity. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. That afternoon, I came home from the hardware store to find the orange cord back again. This time, plugged into my decoy outlet, the one I'd rewired to the subpanel. I smiled, flipped the workshop switch to 240V, and waited. The result was instantaneous. From across the fence came a loud pop, followed by a chorus of shocked exclamations, then silence. I jogged to the fence line, pretending concern. Karen stood in her backyard holding a scorched power strip in one hand and glaring at a lifeless flat iron dangling from the other. "What did you do?" she shouted. "Karen," I said calmly, "you really need to stop plugging into my property. That wasn't your socket. It was the shared exterior one." "Shared," I repeated. "Then why is it on my wall?" Her voice trembled, not from fear, but sheer disbelief that anyone dared to argue. You are unbelievable. I could have been electrocuted. Good thing you weren't, I said. Maybe next time, use your own power supply. She stormed off, screaming about lawyers. Within an hour, 3 HOA board members were at my door. Mr. Daniels, one began cautiously. There's been a misunderstanding. About what? Mrs. Dillard claims you intentionally caused damage to her property by altering a shared outlet. I invited them inside, served them coffee, and played the footage from my security cameras. Karen crossing onto my property multiple times, plugging in cords, even digging under the fence. The timestamps were crystal clear. By the time the footage ended, none of them could look me in the eye. One cleared his throat. Well, this certainly complicates things. I'd say it clarifies them, I replied. She's been stealing power. You can handle it internally, or I can handle it legally. Your call. They exchanged nervous glances. Let's review this at the next meeting. Karen must have expected them to side with her, because 2 hours later, she was back on her porch yelling across the fence like we were in a bad sitcom. You think you're clever? She snapped. You think the HOA can't touch you? Karen, I called back. You're standing in your bathrobe screaming about electricity. Maybe sit this one out. That night, I caught her husband outside smoking by the curb. He gave me a quiet nod and muttered, "For what it's worth," I told her to stop. Then he sighed and disappeared inside. By Wednesday, things went quiet. Eerily quiet. No cords, no notices, no shouting. I almost believed it was over. Then on Friday morning, my power flickered. Just once, briefly. I checked the breaker panel. Everything was fine. But when I stepped outside, I noticed something odd. My meter cover was slightly ajar. Someone had pried it open. A sinking feeling hit me. Karen had escalated again, this time straight to the source. I crouched beside the meter and saw faint scuff marks, like someone had tried to attach a clamp or secondary lead. My jaw clenched. That wasn't petty theft anymore. That was tampering with utility equipment. I called the power company and asked them to inspect it. They sent a technician the next day. His face went pale when he saw the setup. Someone's been piggybacking your line, he said. See that residue? That's from jumper clips. Dangerous stuff. You're lucky it didn't spark. He disconnected the tampered section and filed an official report. We'll send this to the HOA and the city, he added. Perfect. I didn't even have to lift a finger. By Sunday, a city inspector showed up. Karen came running out, all smiles and innocence, pretending she'd just baked cookies. The inspector ignored her completely. He went straight to her side of the fence, pulled up a patch of soil, and uncovered, you guessed it, a buried line feeding from my meter. Karen's smile evaporated. When the inspector asked if it was hers, she froze, speechless for the first time since I'd met her. And as I watched from my porch, sipping my coffee, I realized this wasn't just a neighborhood feud anymore. This was turning into an investigation. And the voltage war had only just begun. By the time the city inspector drove away, Karen was pacing her driveway like a caged animal. Her pink slippers scuffed the concrete, her robe flapping in the morning breeze, as if she were trying to conjure an excuse out of thin air. The inspector had given her a warning on the spot. Illegal tampering with a utility meter wasn't something that could be brushed off as a neighborly misunderstanding. He'd promised to file a formal report with both the power company and the HOA board. The look on Karen's face said she knew exactly what that meant. Her spotless, self-crafted image as the model neighbor was about to take a serious hit. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. There's a strange kind of exhaustion that comes from being right too often against someone who refuses to learn. It's like arguing with gravity. You don't win, you just outlast it. Still, I knew her next move wouldn't be retreat. Karen didn't lose quietly. She retaliated with paperwork, manipulation, and rumors. So I braced myself. Sure enough, by that afternoon, whispers started circling the cul-de-sac. Mrs. Collins, the same neighbor Karen had been chatting with earlier, stopped me while I was trimming the hedge. Daniel, she began, lowering her voice conspiratorially. I heard some unsettling things. Is it true you've been modifying your meter for personal gain? I stared at her. Personal gain? She nodded gravely. Karen says you've been stealing her power. I nearly choked on air. Her power? Yes. She said the inspector misunderstood everything, that you ran an underground line and framed her. For a long second, I just stared at her, pruning shears frozen midair. Then I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the sheer audacity was something to behold. Karen hadn't just flipped the narrative. She'd welded it shut and stamped her initials on it. Mrs. Collins, I said finally, I've got full video logs, timestamps, and city records. If she wants to keep lying, she can explain it to the inspector when the fine arrives. Collins's face softened. I figured as much. Between you and me, the boards had enough of her antics, but she's persuasive. That night, the HOA group email pinged. Subject line, electrical safety update, a message from your HOA treasurer. I opened it. It was a manifesto. Karen had written a 900-word essay accusing certain residents, me, obviously, of creating dangerous electrical modifications that threaten neighborhood safety. She called for immediate intervention and a temporary suspension of electrical privileges for all exterior outlets until the matter is resolved. Electrical privileges, as if power were a community toy she could confiscate. I responded simply, I trust the city's official report will clarify the matter. Please refrain from tampering with or accessing private property. 5 minutes later, she replied, You're welcome for the attention to safety. We can't all be reckless. The woman had no off switch. The following morning, a white utility van arrived. I assumed it was the power company following up, but when the workers started digging around my meter again, I stepped outside. Excuse me, I said. Can I help you? One of them looked up. We got a service request from the HOA. Something about re-verifying compliance. Did that request come from the city or a resident? He checked his clipboard. Mrs. Dillard. Of course. She'd called in a fake service order under the HOA's name to make it look official. I showed him the city's notice and the inspector's card. This has already been resolved. If you touch anything without authorization, it's trespassing. The man frowned, nodded, and packed up his tools. Understood. Sorry for the trouble. As the van pulled away, I saw Karen peeking through her blinds like a hawk denied its prey. She quickly vanished when she realized I'd spotted her. That night, I installed a discreet camera near the meter. I wasn't paranoid anymore. I was documenting. At this point, her escalation was practically scientific. She'd test, get caught, adapt, then test again. 2 days passed peacefully, which was unusual. Then came the smell. It started faint, a sharp, acrid scent drifting through the air. At first, I thought someone was burning leaves, but when I stepped outside, the smell grew stronger near the fence. I followed it to the side yard, where I found something that made my stomach twist. A blackened power cord lying in the grass, melted into the soil. Karen had tried again, this time attaching her line directly to the sub-panel conduit that ran underground. It must have overloaded instantly, shorting out the cord before she could draw power. She was lucky it hadn't set her fence on fire. I turned off the breakers and made a few calls. First, the power company, then the HOA, then finally, the sheriff's department. I'd had enough. Deputy Wilson showed up around dusk. A calm man with a sun-faded uniform and the demeanor of someone who'd seen every kind of suburban nonsense. Evening, he said, shaking my hand. You're the guy with the outlet issue? I nodded. She's tried 3 times now. This last one could have burned half the block. He examined the melted cord and whistled softly. That's a 14-gauge line. Way too light for this kind of load. You're right. This could have gone bad fast. I showed him the video clips, the timestamps, and the photos. He nodded slowly. You've got enough here for a criminal mischief report, maybe even attempted theft of utilities. Will she get arrested? I asked. Depends, he said. Sometimes a warning does the trick. Sometimes it doesn't. But she'll get a visit. He took my statement, packed up the evidence, and left. I thought that might finally end things. It didn't. The next morning, Karen was back at it, but in a different way. She wasn't sneaking around anymore. She was standing on her front lawn, arms crossed, shouting to anyone who'd listen. "He's framing me. He's got a personal vendetta," she declared to poor Mrs. Collins, who looked like she wished she could evaporate. "That man is obsessed with me, constantly spying, recording, harassing." I stepped outside just as she pointed dramatically in my direction. "See, there he is again." I smiled and waved. "Morning, Karen." "Sheriff says hi." Her expression faltered for just a second, then hardened. "You won't get away with this." "Oh, I think I already have," I said, heading for my car. That afternoon, Deputy Wilson returned, this time to deliver an official notice. The power company had pressed charges for meter tampering, and Karen had been fined nearly $2,000. The HOA board had been notified as well. When I told him she was still shouting about conspiracies, he just sighed. "Some people dig their own holes. You just happened to build the fence next to hers." That night, I heard a knock at my door. I expected another officer or maybe a city inspector. Instead, it was Greg, Karen's husband, standing there with a tired look and a six-pack of cheap beer. "Mind if I come in?" he asked quietly. I hesitated, then nodded. He sat at my kitchen table, cracked open a can, and sighed. "I'm sorry, man. I really am. She's not herself lately. The HOA stuff's gotten to her head. I noticed. She thinks she's protecting the neighborhood. Ever since she got that position, it's like she needs to control everything. Even me." He gave a humorless laugh. "She's convinced everyone's out to humiliate her." "She's doing a great job of that on her own," I said. He smiled weakly. "Yeah, you're not wrong." We sat there for a while, not talking. Two neighbors bound together by the same storm. Finally, he stood. "I'll try to calm her down. Just don't escalate anymore, okay? She'll come apart if this keeps going." "I don't plan to," I said. "But she keeps crossing lines." "Literally." He nodded. "I know. I'll handle it." That night, I actually believed him. I went to bed thinking maybe, finally, peace was possible. At 3:12 a.m., I was proven wrong. A loud crack echoed through the backyard, followed by a bright flash. My smoke alarms blared. I stumbled outside to find the fence on fire. One of the buried cords had ignited from an overloaded junction. Flames licked the edges of her garden and crept toward the shed. I grabbed the hose, dousing the flames before they spread. The fire department arrived minutes later, sirens slicing through the night. They put out the rest quickly, but the damage was done. The melted remains of Karen's orange cords tangled like dead vines across the soil. As the firefighters packed up, one of them handed me a scorched plug, still clinging to my sub-panel conduit. "Looks like your neighbor's project," he said grimly. I just nodded. "Yeah, I'm getting used to it." The next morning, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. For once, I wasn't the target. And when I walked into that meeting room and saw Karen's face, red, trembling, cornered, I knew the current had finally changed direction. When the HOA called the emergency meeting, I almost didn't go. I'd already done my part, filed reports, turned over evidence, and watched enough neighborhood politics to last a lifetime. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see how Karen would handle a room full of people who finally knew she wasn't the benevolent community protector she pretended to be. The clubhouse was packed that morning. Usually, HOA meetings drew maybe 5 board retirees and one guy there just for the free donuts. Today, every seat was filled. Word had spread fast after the fire. Half the block had woken up to sirens and the smell of scorched vinyl fence. Everyone knew who was responsible. Karen sat near the front, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors like a celebrity shielding herself from the paparazzi. Greg sat beside her, silent, hands clasped tightly in his lap. Across from them sat the board, Mrs. Collins, 2 retired engineers, and the HOA president, Mr. Becker, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I took a seat near the back, folded my arms, and waited. Becker cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. We are here to discuss the recent electrical incident between Mr. Daniels and Mrs. Dillard." "Incident?" someone muttered. "That's one way to describe a backyard fire." Becker sighed. "Let's keep this civil." The fire department ruled it was caused by illegal electrical connections between two properties. The power company confirmed tampering. Mrs. Dillard, would you like to explain your side? Karen removed her sunglasses slowly, as if unveiling a tragic heroine. Yes, I would. Her voice trembled with practiced indignation. This entire thing has been blown out of proportion. I was simply trying to ensure community safety. Mr. Daniels installed unauthorized electrical systems that endangered our homes. I only connected to a circuit temporarily to test it. The fire wasn't my fault. The voltage was unstable because of his modifications. The room erupted in murmurs. One man raised his hand. Wait, you admit you connected to his power? Karen hesitated, then lifted her chin. It was for inspection purposes. As a board member, I have the right to verify compliance. Mrs. Collins rubbed her temples. Karen, you don't have that right. You're not an electrician, and you're not authorized by the HOA to inspect private property. Karen's composure faltered for a second. Well, I should be. Someone has to protect this neighborhood from people like him.
I didn't even have to respond. Becker did it for me. People like him? He repeated, eyebrows raised. You mean the homeowner who followed every code, installed safety systems, and provided us with video evidence of your trespassing? Karen flushed crimson. That video was edited. It came straight from the city inspector, Becker said flatly. You've left us with no choice but to issue a full suspension of your HOA privileges pending further review. That was the polite version of saying, you're out. Her jaw dropped. You can't suspend me. I am the HOA. No, Karen, Becker said, his voice firm. You're a treasurer, and as of today, you're relieved of that position, effective immediately. For the first time, Karen didn't have a comeback. She sat there frozen, mouth half open, as if her brain had short-circuited like her power cords. Greg placed a gentle hand on her arm, but she shook him off. When the meeting adjourned, I tried to slip out quietly, but Karen intercepted me in the parking lot. You think you've won, don't you? She spat. You humiliated me in front of everyone. You did that yourself, I said evenly. I just brought the lights. Her eyes blazed. You'll regret this. You'll see. She stormed off before I could reply, and I stood there for a moment, wondering what her version of regret would look like this time. Over the next week, the neighborhood entered a kind of uneasy calm. Without Karen policing everyone's grass length or mailbox color, people actually started talking to each other again. Kids rode bikes down the street without her chasing them for noise violations. It felt normal, but I knew it wouldn't last. The first sign came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was at work when I got a text from my security system. Motion detected, backyard gate open. I pulled up the camera feed and froze. There she was again. Karen, sneaking through the side gate, this time in broad daylight, carrying what looked like a clipboard and a toolbox. I watched in disbelief as she knelt by my breaker box, scribbled notes, and snapped pictures with her phone. Then she reached for the lock. The moment she touched it, my phone's speaker system crackled to life. Karen, I said through the intercom, my voice calm but loud enough to echo. Step away from my property. She jumped like she'd been electrocuted. Her head whipped toward the camera. You can't talk to me like that. I just did, I replied. The sheriff can too, if you'd prefer. She froze for a moment, then turned and ran, literally ran, back toward her yard. That evening, I added new locks, reinforced the gate, and filed another report. It was becoming routine at this point. 2 days later, I got a knock at the door. This time, it wasn't Greg or the cops. It was Becker. Daniel, he said wearily. We've had half the board resign this week. Karen's been calling everyone, threatening lawsuits, claiming you're hacking her home Wi-Fi. I almost laughed. Wi-Fi? He nodded. She says her hair curler started turning on by itself. She's convinced you're remotely sabotaging her appliances. I rubbed my eyes. Becker, I'm starting to think she needs a therapist, not a fine. he sighed. We agree. The HOA is filing a restraining order if this keeps up. I just wanted you to know we're on your side. After he left, I sat on the porch watching the sunset, half expecting Karen to pop up from behind a bush with a voltage meter and an accusation. But for a few days, she vanished completely. Her blinds stayed closed, her driveway empty. Even Greg seemed to disappear. Then one night, I heard a sound that sent chills down my spine, the hum of a generator. I walked outside and followed the noise. It was coming from her backyard. A faint orange glow flickered through her windows. She'd rigged something again, but this time it wasn't my power she was stealing. It was her own homemade setup. The next morning, I found out how bad it was. The generator had been running through the night, feeding an extension cord spiderweb into her house. The fumes must have seeped inside because Greg ended up in the ER with mild carbon monoxide poisoning. The paramedics said he'd been lucky. Another hour, and it could have been fatal. I saw her standing on the curb as they loaded him into the ambulance. She looked pale, shaken, mascara streaking down her face. For once, there was no fight left in her. She didn't look like the tyrant of Oakage Court, just a woman who'd finally lost control of everything she tried to dominate. That evening, she came to my door. Not yelling, not armed with papers, just standing there, eyes red, voice small. I didn't mean for any of this, she said. Greg could have died. I know, I replied quietly. I just wanted things to be perfect. This neighborhood used to be beautiful. People cared. People still do, I said. You just stopped letting them. She nodded slowly, tears forming. They're investigating me. You know, the HOA, the city, everyone. I could lose my position, my home. I don't even know who I am without this.
For a second, I actually felt sorry for her. She wasn't evil, just broken by her own obsession with control. Karen, I said softly, you don't have to keep fighting everyone. You could just stop. She gave a bitter laugh. You make it sound easy. It's easier than electrocuting your fence. That earned a small, shaky smile. Then she turned and walked away. I thought maybe that would be the end, that the scare with Greg would finally wake her up. But deep down, I knew better. People like Karen don't surrender. They recharge. And the following week, when I came home to find a city inspection notice taped to my door, filed anonymously, accusing me of illegal power distribution and surveillance equipment, I knew the current was about to surge again. Only this time, I wasn't just defending my outlet. I was defending my home. The inspection notice looked harmless enough. A crisp sheet of paper stamped with the city's seal and taped neatly to my door. But I'd been around Karen long enough to recognize her fingerprints, metaphorical or otherwise. The complaint alleged unauthorized electrical modifications, non-compliant voltage converters, and unregistered monitoring devices. It even mentioned possible electromagnetic interference with nearby residences. That last phrase was pure Karen, vague, dramatic, and engineered to sound sinister to bureaucrats. I called the number listed on the notice. The inspector, a man named Jeff Whitaker, answered on the second ring. His voice was polite but weary, like someone who'd been dragged into 100 neighborhood feuds just like mine. Mr. Daniels, yes, we received a report regarding potential electrical code issues at your address. I'll be conducting an inspection tomorrow morning. Can I ask who filed it? I said. Anonymous submission, he replied, though we both knew anonymity was just a thin veil for someone with too much time and a clipboard full of grievances. I thanked him and hung up, then looked around my property. Everything was by the book, clean installs, grounded connections, documented upgrades, but that wasn't the point. Karen wasn't trying to prove I'd done something wrong. She was trying to drown me in bureaucracy, one inspection at a time. The next morning, Jeff arrived right on schedule. He was a middle-aged guy with sunburned cheeks and the calm patience of someone who'd seen it all. I offered him coffee and gave him a tour of the setup. Breaker panels, conduit runs, battery backup, all labeled and up to code. He took notes, nodded approvingly, and even complimented my wiring work. You'd be surprised how many people cut corners, he said. This is professional grade stuff. Appreciate it, I said. So, I'm in the clear? He smiled. From what I can see, absolutely. But whoever filed this didn't just mention electrical work. They also listed suspicious surveillance equipment. Mind if I take a look? I gestured toward the security cameras mounted along the eaves. Those are just standard Ring and Arlo units. HI allows them. He chuckled. You'd be amazed how often that word surveillance gets thrown around. Usually by the person who doesn't like being caught on video. Exactly. He wrapped up after an hour, leaving me with a signed clearance form stating there were no violations found. I pinned it proudly to my corkboard beside Karen's earlier citations, the growing trophy wall of her failed crusades. I figured that would settle it. I underestimated her again. That evening, I saw her standing at the end of my driveway, arms crossed, glaring at the inspector's car as it pulled away. When our eyes met, she gave me the kind of smile that promised trouble. The next day, 2 HOA letters arrived simultaneously. One accusing me of creating a hostile living environment through excessive surveillance, and another summoning me to a special review meeting regarding neighborhood harmony. I read both, laughed, and poured myself a drink. Harmony? That was rich coming from the woman who nearly electrocuted herself twice. I didn't attend the meeting. Instead, I sent Becker an email with a copy of the city clearance report attached. His reply came 5 minutes later. Consider this matter closed. We're done indulging her. For the first time in months, I actually exhaled. Then came the power outage. It happened on a Friday night just after sunset. The entire block went dark. Streetlights, porch lights, everything. At first, I assumed it was a grid issue, but when I checked my solar backup system, it was still humming perfectly. Every house except Karen's and mine had power. That didn't make sense. The outage was selective, targeted. My gut told me this was no accident. I went outside, flashlight in hand, and found the answer within minutes. At the side of my house, near the junction box, someone had flipped the manual disconnect lever and padlocked it in the off position with a brand new lock that wasn't mine. Someone had shut off my power, and unless the power company had suddenly decided to enforce surprise maintenance at 8 p.m., I knew exactly who it was. I walked next door and rang Karen's bell. No answer. The house was dark except for a faint glow inside, candlelight maybe, or the pale blue of a laptop screen. I rang again. Nothing. Then I heard it. The faint, mechanical hum of her generator starting up in the backyard. Unbelievable. She'd cut my power and turned hers on. I could have called the cops right then, but instead, I decided to handle it my way. Quiet, legal, and devastatingly thorough. I took photos of the new lock, the tripped disconnect, and the time-stamped blackout readings from my system. Then I pulled the footage from my security cameras. It took only a minute to find her. At 7:42 p.m., creeping through the hedge line with a flashlight and a wrench, her face fully visible, her HOA badge clipped to her robe pocket. She'd come disguised as an inspector of her own delusions. I sent the footage straight to Becker, the sheriff, and because I knew it would sting the most, to the HOA mailing list. Subject: unauthorized power interference. Visual confirmation. It went viral within the neighborhood in under an hour. By morning, I had 5 emails from neighbors thanking me for finally exposing her, 2 asking if I'd consider running for the HOA board, and 1 from Greg that simply said, "I'm sorry again. I'm done trying to stop her." Karen, predictably, didn't apologize. Instead, she went silent for 3 full days. No shouts, no notes, no new accusations. The quiet was unsettling, like the eye of a storm. On the 4th night, I discovered what she'd been doing. I was taking out the trash when I noticed something strange. Tiny flickers of light through the fence gaps, accompanied by muffled voices. I moved closer and saw her backyard was filled with people. She'd organized a neighborhood safety task force meeting, basically a rebranded version of her old HOA committee, now operating outside official authority. She was standing under a patio umbrella, speaking into a small megaphone. "We can't let dangerous individuals compromise our homes," she declared. "The HOA has failed us, but we, the residents, can take action." Action. That word set off alarms in my head. The crowd, maybe a dozen people, nodded hesitantly. Most of them were just bored or nosy, the kind of folks who join any cause that promises free coffee. But a few looked genuinely riled up. Karen had found new recruits. I hit record on my phone and kept filming. She went on to describe me as a rogue homeowner with illegal power devices capable of electromagnetic interference. It was half conspiracy theory, half community theater. When she started handing out flyers titled Protect Oakage from Power Parasites, I'd had enough. I called Deputy Wilson again. He arrived 20 minutes later, lights flashing but siren off. I met him by the curb and played him the recording. He watched for maybe 10 seconds before sighing. "She's still at it," he muttered. "She's recruiting people now," I said. "This isn't just harassment anymore. It's defamation." He nodded. "You're right. And considering she's already on record for trespassing and tampering, this makes things worse for her." We walked together toward her yard. The crowd went silent as the deputy stepped into the light. Karen froze mid-speech, megaphone still in hand. "Evening, folks," Wilson said calmly. "Sorry to interrupt. Mrs. Dillard, can we have a word?" Karen tried to recover. "Officer, we're holding a lawful neighborhood meeting." He raised an eyebrow. "About electromagnetic warfare?" The crowd chuckled nervously. He lowered his voice. "Karen, you're violating the restraining order. You can't organize gatherings about Mr. Daniels or his property. Pack it up." For the first time, she looked genuinely cornered. Her eyes darted around for support, but her audience suddenly remembered they had places to be. Within minutes, the yard was empty. Wilson turned to me. "We're filing for a full protective order this time. You won't be dealing with her directly again." "Thank God," I said. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. No flickering lights, no generators, no mysterious chords. Just quiet. But as I drifted off, I couldn't shake one lingering thought. Karen had lost her audience, her power, and her control. But she wasn't the type to disappear quietly. And sure enough, the next morning, I woke up to find something sitting neatly on my porch. A single envelope. No name, no return address. Inside was a printed photo of my house, taken at night from across the street. And scrawled on the back in jagged handwriting were 3 words: "This isn't over." I stared at the photo on my porch for a long time, the morning sun creeping across the steps until it touched the edge of the paper. The handwriting was unmistakable, big, jagged, and aggressively slanted. The kind of script that looked carved more than written. "This isn't over." It was almost laughable if it hadn't been so deeply unsettling. Karen had gone from petty vandal to full-on nighttime surveillance. I slipped the photo into an evidence folder and checked my security feed. Sure enough, at 2:13 a.m., a figure appeared in the footage. She was wearing a hoodie and gloves this time, trying poorly to disguise herself. But the way she moved, the distinctive tilt of her head, even the glint of her oversized earrings, it was her. She'd walked across the street, snapped a photo, and left the envelope on my porch like some deranged calling card. I should have called the police immediately, but something in me hesitated. Not out of fear, out of curiosity. What did she want now? She'd lost the HOA, her reputation, and most of her allies. Greg had moved out temporarily after the generator incident, according to Mrs. Collins. So, what was left to fight for? Later that afternoon, Deputy Wilson showed up to collect the new evidence. He looked tired, like the whole saga had become a permanent fixture in his paperwork. "You've been more than patient," he said, flipping through the photos. "At this point, we can file stalking and harassment charges. That'll stick." "Do it," I said simply. He nodded, scribbled a few notes, and promised to return with an update. As his cruiser rolled away, I looked across the street at Karen's house. Curtains drawn, blinds closed, no sign of life. It looked like a tomb for an obsession. That night was quiet. Too quiet. Not the peaceful kind. More like the kind where you know the world's holding its breath before something breaks. I triple-checked the locks, set motion alerts to high sensitivity, and went to bed early. At 1:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected. Backyard. I sat up instantly. On the live feed, a shadow moved near the fence line. Slow, deliberate. Then came a faint metallic clink, followed by another. Someone was loosening something. I grabbed a flashlight and a wrench, stepped onto the porch, and yelled, "Karen, if that's you again, this is your last warning." No response. The movement stopped, then vanished. I waited, scanning the yard. Nothing. Just crickets and the faint hum of distant streetlights. I was about to go back inside when I noticed something strange. A faint shimmer on the grass near the sub-panel conduit. I crouched down, aimed my flashlight, and swore under my breath. Someone had poured water. A lot of it, enough to soak the soil around the power line. I followed the puddle trail toward the fence. It led directly to Karen's property. She'd been trying to short my system again, this time through groundwater. It was amateurish, but dangerous. One spark could have set my yard ablaze. I called Wilson back, but by the time he arrived 20 minutes later, she was gone. He inspected the scene, shook his head, and muttered, "She's going to get herself killed at this rate." "I think that's her plan," I said quietly. He frowned. "Meaning?" "Control," I said. "It's all she ever wanted. And now that she's lost it, she's spiraling. She'd rather burn the whole block down than admit defeat." He didn't disagree. "We'll patrol tonight. File this as attempted property damage. If she steps foot here again, she's done." When he left, I sat on the porch until dawn, the folder of photos beside me like a growing archive of madness. By morning, the neighborhood was buzzing again, but this time not with Karen's rumors. People were angry. The HOA's private Facebook group was flooded with posts demanding action. Photos of the burned fence, the generator fire, and now the porch threat had made the rounds. The sympathy she'd once manipulated was gone. Then someone, probably Collins, posted a link to the sheriff's official report. It listed Karen Dillard under active investigation for harassment and vandalism. That was it. The mask came off. By noon, I saw her standing on her porch barefoot, clutching her phone, screaming into it. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. The rage was pure static. Eventually, she threw the phone onto the lawn and stormed back inside. The next day, a "for sale" sign appeared on her front yard. I almost didn't believe it. After all that chaos, the woman who'd made herself queen of the cul-de-sac was leaving her kingdom. But the realtor's name was real, the number legit. She was actually selling. When I told Becker, he just sighed in relief. "Maybe this is the end," he said. But endings with Karen were never that simple. That night, I came home to find her mailbox stuffed with flyers. People celebrating, neighbors gossiping about her downfall. Someone had even left a sarcastic note. "Need power? Call Daniel." Petty, sure, but after months of torment, I couldn't blame them.
At midnight, I heard a noise. Not the soft kind of movement I'd grown used to, but the sharp, angry sound of metal hitting metal. I looked outside and saw Karen at her own mailbox, ripping the flyers out one by one, shredding them to bits. Then she turned toward my house. Even from across the street, I could see the wildness in her eyes. She shouted something I couldn't hear, hurled the crumpled papers into the air, and stomped back inside. I decided to ignore it. One more tantrum before the curtain fell. But at 3:00 a.m., the smoke alarm went off. The sharp, shrill screech yanked me out of sleep. I stumbled into the hallway, disoriented, heart pounding. The smell hit next, chemical and acrid like burning plastic. I ran outside and my blood froze. The fence between our yards was on fire again, this time higher, angrier, crawling fast toward my shed. I grabbed the hose, turned it full blast, and sprayed until my hands ached. The flames hissed, crackled, then finally died under the water's weight. When I looked closer, I saw the cause. Another extension cord, melted, frayed, plugged into one of her outlets and threaded through the fence slats. She'd done it again. Only this time she'd crossed into arson territory. I called the fire department, then the sheriff. Wilson arrived first, his face a mix of disbelief and exhaustion. "She poured accelerant on it," he said after examining the debris. "There's residue all over the soil. This wasn't an accident." "Tell me you're arresting her," I said. "Oh, we're way past warnings," he replied grimly. "They found her inside, sitting on the floor amid piles of half-packed boxes. The fire had scorched part of her siding, and the smoke had filled her kitchen. When the deputies escorted her out, she didn't fight or scream. She just stared straight ahead, hollow-eyed, muttering something about balancing the current. I watched from my porch as they led her to the cruiser. She looked smaller somehow, like the voltage had finally drained out of her. As the taillights disappeared down the street, the neighborhood stood outside in silence. Nobody cheered. Nobody clapped. We just watched the last sparks fade from her burned fence and listened to the crickets take back the night. The next morning, Greg came by. His face was gray with fatigue, but his voice was steady. "She's being held for evaluation," he said. "They think she had a breakdown. She really believed you were stealing power from everyone, that your system was some kind of weapon. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated. Another part just felt sorry for both of them." "She'll get help?" I asked. "I hope so," he said. "She's not a monster. She's just wired wrong." He gave a faint, sad smile at his own pun, then left. A week passed. The house went quiet. The for sale sign disappeared, replaced by foreclosure notices. Life on Oakage Court slowly returned to normal. Barbecues, sprinklers, kids laughing again. One evening, Becker dropped by with a bottle of bourbon. We sat on the porch watching the sun dip low behind Karen's empty house. "You know," he said, "the HOA voted to dissolve her bylaws. No more ridiculous fines or power clauses." "Good," I said. "Maybe people can finally breathe." He nodded, then poured another glass. "You really think she's gone for good?" I looked across the street. The house was dark, windows boarded, but one curtain fluttered slightly in the wind. And for a second I thought I saw movement inside, a shadow shifting behind the glass. "Yeah," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "She's gone." Still, when I went inside that night, I double-checked the locks. For months, the quiet felt permanent. But peace built on a battlefield is fragile. I should have known that a current that strong could never truly be shut off. And as I'd soon discover, the war for Oakage Court was far from over.
For weeks after Karen's arrest, Oakage Court was transformed. It wasn't the kind of peaceful silence that comes with calm. It was the aftermath of a storm, when even the wind seems cautious, like it doesn't want to trigger another disaster. Neighbors waved at each other more. The HOA meetings were shorter, lighter, almost civil. Becker joked once that the neighborhood had gone through electrical therapy. We all laughed, but we knew it wasn't entirely a joke. Everyone had learned how fragile normal could be when one person decided to play God with power lines and paranoia. I didn't think much about her anymore. Her house sat empty, foreclosure notices slowly curling in the sun, grass creeping over the walkway she once measured with military precision. Greg had moved into an apartment across town. I sent him one polite message a few weeks later. Just a simple, "Hope you're doing okay." He replied, trying to rebuild. "Thanks." For the first time in months, I slept without the sound of alarms or the hum of surveillance feeds. Still, some habits stuck. I couldn't bring myself to turn off my outdoor cameras. They stayed on, just in case. Then one morning, a white van pulled up to Karen's old house. It had the logo of a property management company on the side, Clear Path Realty. Two workers got out carrying clipboards and toolboxes. The neighborhood's collective curtain flutter began instantly. After months of chaos, new owners meant fresh gossip material. By noon, I wandered over, pretending to check my mailbox just to catch a better look. One of the men smiled when he saw me. "You're the neighbor, right? We're doing a safety check before the bank lists it." "Yeah," I said. "That place has had history." He laughed. "We heard. The file says previous electrical incident. Understatement of the year, I guess." They went inside, and for the next few hours, I heard the faint clanging of tools and the occasional sound of a drill. Around 3, one of them called out, "Hey, come look at this," and both vanished into the basement. Not 10 minutes later, a burst of static came through my own power monitor. the same one connected to the subpanel that had caused months of hell. The voltage spiked for half a second, then leveled out. My stomach dropped. I crossed the street fast, met by one of the workers coming up from the basement, coughing through dust. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, waving it off. "Just a mess down there." Someone left a whole secondary breaker box installed off the main panel. Looks like homemade wiring. Crazy stuff. It's all dead now, though. Homemade wiring. Of course. She had one last surprise buried in the walls. They showed me what they found. Wires looping into strange configurations, outlets that didn't connect anywhere, and a small junction box hidden behind drywall. When they opened it, we found something even stranger. A row of cheap wireless modules, each wired into the grid, all labeled in her handwriting: North Line, South Tap, Daniel Feed. For a moment, none of us spoke. "You think she was trying to reroute your power?" one of the men asked. "Wouldn't put it past her," I said. They took pictures for the report, and I returned home feeling both vindicated and unnerved. Karen had left behind a literal ghost network, her own Frankenstein grid designed to leech off my system even after she was gone. That night I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, the air humming with crickets. The house across the street was dark again, but now it felt different, less haunted, more hollow, like a machine that had finally lost its charge. Then, just as I was heading inside, my porch light flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. Coincidence, I told myself. Old wiring. Nothing more. The next morning, Becker called. "Hey," he said, "you might want to know. The realtor said Karen's property sold faster than expected." "Sold?" I repeated. "To who?" "Anonymous buyer. Paid in cash." That word anonymous landed heavier than it should have. I thanked him and hung up, but unease lingered. The sale was legitimate according to county records, but the deed listed the owner as Dillard Holdings, LLC. I didn't need a detective to figure out who was behind that. That evening, I saw the first sign of life. A single moving truck parked out front. No people, just the sound of doors opening and closing. I watched through the blinds as two figures, one tall, one shorter, unloaded furniture. From a distance, I couldn't see their faces, but then the shorter one turned toward the porch light, and my heart gave a slow, cold thud. Karen. Her hair was shorter, darker, but it was her. The confident, methodical movements, the stiff posture. There was no mistaking it. By morning, the truck was gone, and her car sat in the driveway like it had never left. No new names on the mailbox. No change of address sign. Just the Dillards. Back from the dead. I spent the day debating what to do. The sheriff's office had released her after psychiatric evaluation, with the restraining order still active. But this wasn't a violation. Technically, she had every right to live there again. Still, I couldn't ignore the feeling that she'd returned with a plan. That night, the lights in her windows came on. Not the warm glow of lamps, but harsh, white light. Industrial, clinical. Then the faint buzz returned. That same electrical hum that had haunted me for months. I checked my monitor again. Another brief voltage spike, then a flat line. She was testing something. At dawn, I saw her standing in her driveway, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. She even waved at Mrs. Collins, who looked too shocked to respond. Then she saw me. Her smile was calm, polite, almost neighborly. "Morning, Daniel," she called across the street. I didn't answer. Later that afternoon, Becker came by, concern written all over his face. "You heard she's back?" he asked. "Yeah, she can't bother you again. The restraining order is still good for another 6 months. She doesn't need to step on my property," I said. "She just needs to flip one switch." He frowned. "You think she'll try again?" I think she never stopped. That night, I stayed up monitoring the live voltage feed. Around midnight, a single blip appeared. Exactly the kind that happens when someone attaches a draw line. Not enough to trip anything, just enough to test the current. I went outside quietly, crossing the lawn. Her house was dark except for one faint glow in the garage. Through the narrow window, I saw her working at a small bench cluttered with wires and meters. She was soldering something, her face calm, methodical. It wasn't rage anymore. It was focus. I stepped back, heart pounding. This wasn't madness. It was purpose. The next day, I filed another report with the sheriff's office. Wilson called that evening. "We'll check it out," he said. "But without proof of tampering, we can't do much. Keep your footage running." So I did. 2 nights later, my backyard lights surged brighter than I'd ever seen them. Then went dark. The entire system shut off. I rushed outside, tripped the breaker, and found the cause immediately. My sub-panel cover was open again. But this time, the lock hadn't been cut. It had been picked. Inside, someone had wired a small black box to the neutral line. A transmitter. I yanked it out, took photos, and called Wilson. When he arrived, he stared at the device for a long time before saying, "You're right. That's not standard equipment. This is custom." And whoever built it knew exactly what they were doing. We looked across the street. Her lights were on again. She stood in her driveway, calm as ever, watching us. When Wilson crossed over to speak with her, she smiled sweetly, said she'd just moved back to make peace, and denied everything. The deputy warned her about the restraining order, but she didn't care. She knew the system as well as I knew circuits, every limit, every loophole. After he left, I unplugged everything I owned. Cameras, lights, even the solar feed. I wasn't scared of her anymore. I was tired of her using my own power against me. The next morning, the neighborhood woke to find her house completely dark again. No hum, no lights, no sound. Just silence. By afternoon, a city utility van arrived. Apparently, her meter had tripped from irregular feedback. Whatever she'd built, it had finally turned on her. When the crew cut her line and disconnected the property, I watched from my porch, coffee in hand. That night, she came to her window. The faint glow of a candle flickered behind the glass. She stared across the street, her silhouette motionless. Then, with one deliberate motion, she raised her hand, not waving, not threatening, just holding it there, palm out, as if to say, "You win." And for the first time, I believed her. A week later, movers came again. By the end of the day, the house was empty. No goodbye, no note, no more sparks. Just darkness. Oakage Court finally went still. Months passed. Spring came. I replaced my burned fence with cedar, painted it bright white, and planted climbing jasmine along the edge. The new neighbors, a quiet young couple, moved into Karen's old house, blissfully unaware of the voltage wars that had once raged there. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I still think about her. How one woman's obsession with control short-circuited her entire life. And how, in a strange way, we were both caught in the same current, each refusing to back down until something finally broke. The difference is, I learned when to shut the power off. She never did.